Yo, what's going on, y'all? It's Cone back here again today with another video. Game 7 of Sixers Celtics just wrapped up as I'm recording this video, and as I'm sure you probably already know, the Sixers got absolutely annihilated by the Celtics in Boston in this Game 7. Boston was up by as much as 30 in this one, leading by a ton in the third quarter. Really, this game was never close after the first half. They ended up winning by 24 points. Just all around an amazing showing from the Celtics, who have had their ups and downs so far throughout these playoffs. Some rough performances against the Hawks. In this series against the Sixers, there were times where I was like, where did the Boston Celtics go? And then games like this where I'm like, oh, okay, there they are. It's been a weird playoffs for the Celtics, but regardless, they're moving on to the Eastern Conference Finals to face off against the Miami Heat for the third time in these last 4 years. Their second year in a row facing off against the Heat, and they've got a chance to make back-to-back finals, this time having to go through the 8-seeded Miami Heat as opposed to the 1-seeded Heat. It's going to be a really fun series. I'm going to make a full breakdown of that Eastern Conference Finals matchup in the next couple of days, so make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on that one. I think it's going to be really, really fun. But yeah, I'm going to give Boston a little bit of love before I get into a lot that I need to talk about with the Sixers. Mainly, I got to talk about Jason Tatum real quick, who had 51 points in this game. He shot ridiculously efficiently too, which has been a problem for him at times in this series. He shot 17 of 28 from the field, 6 of 10 from 3. He had 13 boards, 5 assists, 2 steals, and like I said, the 51 points, which is the most points by any player in a Game 7 in NBA history, beating out Steph Curry, who literally did it like a couple of weeks ago against the Sacramento Kings in Game 7, where he had 50 points. So Jason Tatum quite literally one-upped him, dropping 51 in this one. It was a dominant performance, probably the best game of Jason Tatum's career, and it came at the end of a really weird series for Jason Tatum, where at some points, like the Celtics themselves, I was like, who is this guy Jason Tatum? What did he do with the player that we saw majority of the season? And then there were moments where I'm like, okay, yeah, that's Jason Tatum that we've been looking for, like, for example, in the first half of Game 6, where he probably had the worst half of his entire playoff career, having 1 point and shooting like, what was it, like 0 for 9, 0 for 10, 0 for 11, something like that. He was abysmal. And then the second half, particularly in that fourth quarter, he completely turned up. He was the reason why the Celtics were able to close the door on Game 6 against Philly, get themselves to a Game 7, and of course, he was the reason why they eviscerated the Sixers in this Game 7. I mean, he was also helped out a bit by Jaylen Brown, who had 25 points, Al Horford, who played some amazing defense on Joel Embiid, as he did this entire series. And I know a lot of people, and I'm going to talk about in a bit, are talking about how Embiid and Harden choked, but I do think the Celtics deserve a lot of love for the defense that they played on those two stars in this series. They threw a ton of different looks at them. Al Horford has always been a guy that has been great at stopping Joel Embiid, and they do deserve credit. We can talk a lot about Harden and Embiid in their play in the playoffs, but the Celtics 100% deserve some love for the way that they themselves played in this series. So shout out to Al Horford, the defense that he played. Robert Williams, the double big lineup in general, making a return late in the series was huge for why Boston was able to close this thing out eventually. Shout to Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, the rest of the Celtics squad. Shout to Joe Mazzulla, who got a lot of hate over the course of this series for the way that he coached, and he did do some things that I didn't love, but ultimately he was able to coach them into this blowout win, and now he's got the biggest challenge yet in an Eastern Conference Finals, going up against a Miami Heat team that, if the Celtics have some unserious moments like we've seen from them at points in these playoffs against, the Heat are going to take advantage of that. The Heat are one of those teams that don't play around. If you give them the slightest glimmer of hope, if you show the slightest bit of weakness, they're going to attack that constantly. Jimmy Butler has been unstoppable in the playoffs. Bam Adebayo has kind of flown under the radar in these playoffs, but he's been phenomenal. They might get Tyler Hero back at some point in this series. The Heat don't quit. They are ready for this matchup, regardless of the fact that they're the 8 seed and the underdog. The Heat are ready for this, and I think it's going to be a really fun series, a grinded out one that is going to be really enjoyable to watch. The past two series between these two teams were incredibly fun as well. I'm excited for this one going into it. And yeah, shout out to the Boston Celtics. They've been incredibly successful in this Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown era, and the success just continues for this group. And now we can go ahead and talk about the Sixers, because it's rough. Philly fans are really feeling it right now. The timeline is an absolute mess for them at the moment. There's people saying Joel Embiid is the worst MVP ever. People just piling on him and James Harden for being playoff chokers. A lot of people calling for Doc Rivers' job, which I do think he'll end up getting fired, and we'll talk about him in a little bit. But yeah, again, really, regardless of any of the other hot takes, the Sixers factually have flamed out in the second round again. This has been a theme with the Sixers in this era with Joel Embiid, whether it was, in 2021 when they had their chance against the Atlanta Hawks, where they were the 1 seed, they were the better team. They had multiple double-digit leads that they blew in that series. But eventually they had a game 7 at home to try and close that thing out, and they just were unable to do it. Last year against the Miami Heat, Joel Embiid was dealing with injuries to start the series. James Harden was also a bit banged up, but even still they had a chance to go ahead and win that one. They weren't able to execute in that series, and then once again this year they had a 3-2 lead on the Boston Celtics with a home game where Jason Tatum had one of the worst halves of his entire career, and they still could not close things out. They fell apart in that fourth quarter. Joel Embiid really just didn't get the ball whatsoever. They fell into horrible offense, which we've seen them do at times in this era. Jason Tatum torched them for a bunch of threes, and eventually they fell apart in that game 6. And as soon as they lost that game, it felt over for the Sixers. Like, that felt like their big opportunity to finally conquer their demons, get out of the second round, and take down Boston. It felt like that was their chance, and they just let it slip away. And the second that they did, I figured this game 7 was probably going to be a disaster for them. And yeah, I mean, I think this classifies as the definition of a disaster. Embiid and Harden in particular, the two guys that the Sixers absolutely rely on to be their best players, were both really bad. We can go ahead and start with James Harden, I guess, because I think I have a little less to say about him. Harden shot 3 of 11 in this game for 9 points. He had 7 dimes, but 5 turnovers. He was minus 30 on the game. He really did not look good whatsoever. He wasn't super aggressive to start off the game, trying to score the ball like we saw him at times in games 1 and game 4, which were amazing performances. I don't want anything that Harden did in this game and overall in this entire series to take away from what he did in those games, because they don't win or even get this far in this series. They don't win those games if James Harden doesn't play like that. I mean, stealing game 1 on the road in Boston without Joel Embiid in the lineup hitting that game winner is a signature moment for Harden in the playoffs. Like, that was genuinely an amazing moment for him. And game 4, again, hitting a game-winning 3 in the corner, that was big time. Like, those moments were huge for James Harden. The problem is, outside of those 2 games, he really struggled for the most part in basically any other performance. Harden, he's got this kind of narrative around him that he's a playoff choker, and I think it is a bit overblown to say that Harden is a full-out playoff choker, but he has underperformed pretty consistently in his career. This game is another example of that. It didn't do him any favors in those conversations, and now leaving this series, he's a free agent this upcoming offseason. We don't know if he's going to be back in Philly, if he's going to go over to Houston. There's a lot of rumors around that. He was asked in his post-game press conference, a bit about his free agency, and he said he's not really sure what's going to go into that when the time comes, but that he still believes in this group. It was only the first year for them as a group all together for the year, which sounds kind of undecided. I do think there is a good chance that he comes back to Philadelphia if they're willing to give him money. But I mean, where there's smoke, there is fire. And at this point in his career, I wouldn't be surprised if Harden kind of just wants to go back to Houston. Now, I've voiced before in videos, I don't think that's a great fit for him in terms of winning or Houston. I don't like the idea of bringing in a lot older player who's clearly on the decline, signing him to a long-term deal while you're trying to rebuild him, build up this younger core. So I don't really like it for either side, but at the same time, if Harden just kind of wants to go home, I completely understand. If Houston just wants to stop losing, I get it as well. But yeah, I don't know where he's going to end up. But even for Philadelphia, I don't know if bringing him back on a massive deal is the best move unless you can significantly upgrade the roster around Embiid and around James Harden. You need better supporting pieces if you want to get over the hump. But Harden is getting older. He's showing a lot of signs of age. This series probably doesn't put a ton of confidence in them that he's going to be able to consistently turn back the clock and take over when they need him to. So I don't know what they do with James Harden going forward. I don't know if he's here, if he's gone. And even if Harden does want to return, I don't know if it's the wisest idea to cuff yourselves to a 3-4 year, probably near or max contract for James Harden, who, again, looks like he's starting to regress. Maybe you just let your cap space kind of build up over these next few years with Tobias Harris expiring, James Harden expiring, and you try and use that cap space to eventually get Joel Embiid some more help. And I do expect Embiid to continue to be the centerpiece of this team. I don't think the Sixers go into a rebuild. I would be stunned if they did. But there are some concerns with Embiid himself, and I guess this is a better chance than any to talk about Joel Embiid in this series. And in this game in particular, he shot 5 of 18 from the field. He had 15 points. He was a minus 28 on the game. He didn't look great offensively. Defensively, he also did not look phenomenal. He's still dealing with that knee injury, I believe, and the Celtics were really targeting him on the perimeter, putting him in pick and rolls and just making him look like he didn't know what he was doing out there. it was a terrible performance, and really it was just not a great playoffs from Embiid as a whole. In that first round series against the Nets, they were throwing a lot at him. They were basically saying, okay, we're going to send double and literal triple teams to make anybody else on the Sixers team beat us, and credit to the Sixers, they did exactly that. Embiid did not have to do much in that series, and they still got out of there with the sweep, with Embiid not playing in game 4, and then coming into this Boston series, he was dealing with that knee injury. But eventually, you kind of need something from Embiid. He just did not have a great series. The Celtics were throwing a lot of doubles at him. Yes, they were playing some great defense on him, but you're the MVP. They need you to do more. You are the superstar for this team. You have to say, hey, give me the ball, let me cook, and make things happen. He wasn't able to do that in this series. There have been concerns about him dropping off in the playoffs a couple of times now, and it's starting to kind of become a theme, like the Sixers falling out in the second round. We've seen a lot of times where Embiid is supposed to be the best player that leads this team in the playoffs, and he just doesn't quite show up. So that's really concerning as you try and continue to build around him. I do still think he can be the centerpiece of your championship team, but I can't lie, performances in series like this from him, which have kind of become a consistent theme, and especially all the injuries, those are incredibly worrisome because, like, even in this series, he was dealing with that knee injury last year. He got hurt when he got hit in the face at the end of the series, which was kind of a freak accident. But it feels like something like that always pops up for Embiid. So between the kind of consistent playoff drop-offs that we've seen from him and the injuries, it is concerning to build around him as your centerpiece. So I think the Sixers can and probably will continue to do that, but I am a bit concerned with their long-term outlook with him as the centerpiece of what they're trying to build here. So I don't know where the Sixers go from here, whether Harden leaves or stays. They've still got some issues to address. Embiid, is he going to be able to stay healthy? Is he going to be able to step it up in the playoffs? What do you do with the role players, because they don't have a ton of assets, giving up a lot of them in the trade for James Harden about a year ago? I do think one thing they'll try is getting rid of Doc Rivers. I would be shocked if he's still the head coach. I literally just checked Twitter a second ago during that cut because I had to make sure he didn't get fired while I'm recording this video. It'll probably happen in the next couple of days. I would be stunned if he's still their head coach, and maybe bringing in a new head coach, retaining Harden, building up this supporting cast a bit better will ultimately get the Sixers over the hump. But I just don't know how many times they're going to continue to try this thing without making some significant changes. Maybe Harden isn't the right co-star for Embiid. Maybe you need a couple of stars. I really don't know where the Sixers go from here. They're in a really tough spot, not a lot of draft capital to get better. Your best two players continue to underperform in the playoffs. Harden's getting older and regressing. Embiid can't seem to stay healthy. It's kind of a mess in Philadelphia right now, so they're in a really weird spot. I don't really know where they go from here. If you've got any thoughts about the Sixers, let me know in the comments below. But it's just another year where it feels like the Sixers flamed out earlier than maybe they should have. I mean, the Celtics are a good team. They're probably the best team in the Eastern Conference. But they had a chance to finally get over this hump in Game 6. They had the Celtics down 3-2 with the Sixers at home. Jason Tatum having one of the worst games of his entire career in the first half, and they just couldn't do it. I don't know if it's Doc Rivers that's cursed, the Sixers themselves that are cursed, Joel Embiid, James Harden. Someone on this team is cursed. I don't know what is going on, but the Sixers, again, just can't get it done. I don't know if it's ever going to end up working out. So yeah, those are kind of my thoughts on the Sixers at this point. Again, I want to give a lot of credit to what the Celtics did because they deserve a lot of love for the way that they were able to shut down everything the Sixers did, the adjustments that they made. But you just can't help but think about that Game 6 in particular. I think that's really the one that's going to sit in the heads of Sixers fans for a long time, in the heads of the Sixers players. That was the opportunity. They had it. And even this Game 7 where they just came out super flat in the second half and completely collapsed, they're going to be thinking about this one for a long time. I expect drastic changes in the Sixers roster this season, whether it's James Harden gone, whether they do something crazy and trade like Tyrese Maxey for another star. I don't think they will, but just an example of some wild things that they could try in this offseason. I don't think a rebuild is coming, even though maybe it should at some point soon if this thing just doesn't work out. But I do think drastic changes are coming, which is probably good for a Sixers team that once again disappointed. I think those are all my thoughts on this. This video is probably kind of disjointed. I didn't type any notes for this. I kind of just wanted to talk about this one with my knee-jerk kind of immediate reactions to what just happened. So again, if some news has come out since I started recording this video that isn't in this video, that's why, because I tried to record this almost immediately. But yeah, with all that being said, I appreciate y'all watching. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on any of these videos. Comment down below. Let me know what you think about this Eastern Conference Finals coming up. And also, if you're the Sixers, what would you do? Would you start a rebuild? Would you trade Joel Embiid? Would you let James James Harden go? Would you trade Tyrese Maxey for a star? What changes would you make to this roster? Let me know all that in the comment section below, because I think Philly is in a really interesting spot. Also, would you fire Doc Rivers? I'm guessing most of you are going to say yes. And if you would, who would you hire as head coach in his spot? I know Nick Nurse is out there still. Mike Budenholzer, which would be hilarious if that was the outcome. Monty Williams is out there as well. There's a lot of great assistant coaches. I think there are a lot of great and also some not great coaches the Sixers should go for, or could go for, I guess. So let me know in the comments below who you would go for as head coach if you would fire Doc Rivers. Again, I'm guessing most of you would. But yeah, with all that being said, I appreciate watching. I'll see y'all later. Everyone safe back.